Hello, can people hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. It's showing that I'm on mute, but I apparently am not. Okay. Sorry about that. Having some technical difficulties right now, but I think we've worked through them. Just going to give it another minute or so for any latecomers to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, it is 11:04 Mountain Time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started now. This meeting will be recorded for people to review later if you were unable to join or joined late. So this will be recorded, and the full slides and presentation will be posted on the Beam knowledge base. So hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Ben Goldstein with the Colorado Energy Office. Here I am the Senior Program Manager for Commercial Building Decarbonization. I've been here since mid-November, and I've been primarily focusing on the Building Performance Colorado program. So with the program, the reporting season opening recently, about a month ago, figured it's a good time to do another background and update for the whole Building Performance Colorado program. This will be a fairly high level update and just review of. Sorry, there was a comment. Can everyone see me? Or not me, but the presentation? Okay, it looks like people can hear me, but maybe not everyone is able to see me. I'm sorry, not sure what's going on with that. I'm off camera, but the slides should be up. Yeah, just the intro slide is all that we're on right now. Okay. Well, hopefully the majority of people are able to see. Sorry, not really what's going on. Not really sure what's going on right now. But again, the whole presentation will be recorded and posted online for review after. I will, won't take the whole hour for the presentation. I'll leave a lot of time at the end for questions and answers. So, um, sorry if you're not able to see everything, but again, this will all be posted and available. So sorry about that. But anyway, I'm going to go through an update and just review of the various elements of this program, and again, leave some time at the end for some questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so quick legislative background on how we got to this point. In January 2021, the state of Colorado published our greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap, which identified sector-based near-term actions the state could take to reduce GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and buildings were a very high emitter on that, and so the state wanted to look at some different ways to reduce the emissions from the building sector. As a result of these findings, the statute, the Energy Performance for Building statute, linked here as House Bill 21-1286, was passed and signed into law, and that established the benchmarking and emissions reduction goals for buildings covered under the Building Performance Colorado program. Um, and primarily in the statute, it established sector-wide reduction targets of 7% by 2026 and 20% by 2030 based on a 2021 energy use baseline. Um, and just to be clear, this is for buildings as a whole. The different requirements for individual buildings are slightly different, and we'll get to that a little later. These are the numbers to keep in mind for the goals for the entire building sector. The statute, besides establishing some of the core targets and aspects of the program, also directed that the Colorado Energy Office convene a BPS task force, or Building Performance Standards Task Force, that lasted about a year from October 21 through 22. And this created broad recommendations for the state's program. And Regulation 28, which is the rulemaking that formally adopted many of the task force recommendations and established the majority of the rules and requirements and details for the Building Performance Colorado program. Next slide, please. And so one of the main things that people wonder about this program is, what is a covered building under the program and what is a non-covered building? So the main thing is that covered buildings are individual commercial buildings with a gross floor area of at least 50,000 square feet. Their source of truth for this is county tax assessor records. We needed some, consistent baseline from which to get all the information, and we've primarily worked with the county tax assessors to develop the covered buildings list. And as noted here, buildings that share a meter can report benchmarking data at a campus-wide level. So there, we can get into the definitions of that a little later. But primarily, if you are the building owner for a commercial building that is at least 50,000 square feet or larger, you are covered by the Building Performance Colorado program and subject to, all the rules and regulations and compliance targets therein. There are a lot of buildings that are non-covered buildings. Of course, buildings under 50,000 square feet or single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes are clearly non-covered buildings, but there's some other more nuanced exemptions from the program as well. For example, condos or townhomes that do not share centralized heating and cooling systems are not considered covered buildings. So even if you're the owner of a condo or a group of townhomes that have a footprint over 50,000 square feet, but each unit has their own individual heating and cooling system, that would make you a non-covered building. Also, storage facilities, standalone parking garages, and airplane hangars without heating or cooling are also exempt. Or not exempt rather, but they are non-covered buildings since the energy use from these properties is typically very low. And if you are a building owner of a building where at least 50% of the building's gross floor area is dedicated to a manufacturing, agricultural, or industrial process, you are also a non-covered building. Next slide, please. And just to further define what manufacturing, agricultural, or industrial means in the context of Building Performance Colorado, we get this question a lot. Listed here are all the different definitions for agricultural, industrial, and manufacturing purposes and agricultural product. I won't go through and read the whole thing. I'll just leave this up for a minute so people can get their heads around that. This is also listed in the rulemaking and in our technical guidance, both of which are linked in this presentation. And you can refer to as needed. So if right now you feel your building meets one of these definitions and you are not being treated as a non-covered building, you'll have an opportunity to request your building be removed from the covered building list. Next slide, please. And to that point, here's what you should do if you're a non-covered building that has not been correctly marked as so. As I mentioned previously, covered buildings are identified from county tax assessor records, but as I'm sure we all know, these records aren't always 100% accurate. And the local tax assessor may not have properly identified the square footage of your building, or might not know, the exact purpose of your building if you're an MAI facility, or, if you're a condo or townhome that doesn't have centralized heating or cooling, you might be wrapped up in this as well. So if you do find yourself in this situation, what you can do is file a request with the Colorado Energy Office to be removed from the covered building list. There's just a little bit of documentation that you need to provide based on what the criteria is that you're requesting to be removed from the list of. If you're under 50,000 square feet, we typically like to see a floor plan with the building address listed that clearly shows that it's under 50,000 square feet. If it's a building that's a MAI, manufacturing, agricultural, or industrial building, provide some sort of floor plan showing, the different square footage of the building and the different types there, and explaining which areas of the building are being used for one of those MAI purposes, and so on. And it can get pretty nuanced depending on the reason that you're requesting the exemption. And so if the building is not a covered building, it's exempted from the program and will not have to comply with any of the benchmarking or performance standard requirements. You won't have to pay any fees we'll simply put you on our non-covered building list and keep the record for our purposes. I know there's been a lot of people that have filed requests in the past that we're now having to follow up on, and I know that's been a little bit annoying, so my apologies for that. There has been a great deal of staff turnover at the Colorado Energy Office amongst the people who are working on this program. As I mentioned, I've only been here since about mid-November of 2024. And so we're just asking everyone to go through this process again, just so we can finalize and approve everything, look at it with a fresh set of eyes, and ensure that everything's being treated appropriately and in a consistent manner. Um, as it notes here, in 2027, by the statute, we are required to have all non-covered buildings reapply and re-verify their status. So might reach out again in a couple of years to verify, even if you have already been removed from the list. So please keep that in mind in 2027 or so when we reach out again. But that won't be for a while still, and it should be pretty simple, hopefully straightforward process to become exempt or re-verify your non-covered status rather. And final note on this is if anything changes that makes a building a covered building, the building owner is required to notify CEO so we can make sure the building is appropriately complying with the program requirements. So let's say you're an MAI facility and something changes with the building and you no longer meet the criteria to be removed. You have to let us know so we can bring the program back into, or the building back into the program rather, and ensure that it's complying with all requirements and regulations there. Next slide, please. So public buildings, people wondering about public buildings and how they factor into everything here. Public building is defined as a building owned by the state, local government, district, or special district regulated under Title 32, as well as state or private institution of higher education, a school district, or a charter school. So public buildings are largely exempt from the majority of the requirements here. There's no annual benchmarking fees that public buildings are required to meet, and they're not subject to civil penalties, as I mentioned. Public buildings are required to report their benchmarking on an annual basis, but they do not have to meet any building performance standards and could also comply as a campus. The only thing to note here is that there are some criteria that might make the public building have to comply with building performance standards, even though they still won't be required to pay fees. If after October 15th, 2023, the public building undergoes a large capital improvement or renovation that affects at least 25% of the building's gross floor area and has a total cost of at least $500,000, then the public building is actually subject to building performance standards and needs to meet them. Again, there's no fees associated with the public building still, and you still would have to benchmark. But if you undergo a large capital improvement or renovation project that takes place after October 15th, 2023, that meets those criteria, you will have to meet building performance standards. So that is something to be aware of. And similar to non-covered buildings, some buildings have been properly identified as public buildings, but some have not for various reasons, one reason or another. We do have this public building identification form that's linked here. Buildings that believe they're a public building but are not being treated as such can just fill out the information on that form, submit it to us. We'll review the request, and if the building is marked as a public, or is, proven to be a public building, we'll mark that down in our system and ensure that the building is not required to pay any fees and not subject to building performance standards unless it meets the criteria that I just discussed previously. Next slide, please. Okay, so next we'll talk about some specific benchmarking requirements and details there. Next slide. So every year by June 1st, all covered buildings are required to submit benchmarking data to the state for the previous calendar year through the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. And just to be clear on, you might hear us say calendar year or reporting year. The reporting year is just the year in which the data is being reported, and it all is for the previous calendar year. So data that's required to be reported in the 2025 reporting year by June 1st is data from January through December of 2024. And that'll be the case, going forward and retroactively, depending on what year it is. So Reporting includes the energy use for electricity, natural gas, and any other fuel for the reporting year, as well as energy use intensity and greenhouse gas intensity of each building. Um, Using a portfolio manager, which is the EPA's free tool for building owners to benchmark their information, comply with other, building performance standards, and just get a better sense of how their building is performing and what opportunities they might have to reduce their energy use or emissions in certain areas. Um, Everything through Energy Star is generally pretty straightforward. They have a lot of really good resources there. Our team is also putting on several webinars. There was one, I believe, earlier this week, or maybe it was last week. Can't quite remember the date. And there'll be plenty more coming up in the next couple weeks and months. So if you have any specific questions about how to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager, whether you're a brand new user, just really looking for an intro on how the program works, or if you're a more experienced user looking to get into some of the additional nuances of the program, I would definitely look under the Beam knowledge base and look at the upcoming trainings and past recorded trainings, since our team is doing a great job, I think, putting on some really informative Energy Star Portfolio Manager trainings and with some good tips and tricks. So would definitely look at those. And even if you're not able to attend any of those live, just like with this one, uh, all the presentations will be recorded and available online for people to look at, at their convenience. So just going back to the benchmarking, as I said, everything's done through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. You set up sharing with the Colorado Energy Office. The steps to do so are pretty straightforward. Those are available by request, or if you go on to the Beam knowledge base and look for how to share benchmarking with the Colorado Energy Office or with the state, you can follow those steps there. And of course, if you're ever confused or need some additional guidance on that, you can just reach out to us via the help desk, and someone will be able to assist you with that pretty quickly. And you should also note that reporting does not include energy use associated with recharging or refueling vehicles for offsite use, such as EV charging. So if you have EV chargers at your station that are in use, and there's energy use associated with that, you're actually able to submeter those out and not have that count towards your energy use. And if you're unable to submeter out, you can go through a target adjustment process to have that energy use associated with the EV chargers kind of discounted from your total portfolio, which I'll talk about when we get to the target adjustments a little bit later. Next slide, please. So additional notes and information here. The reporting season runs March 1st through June 1st every year. Again, as mentioned, everything goes through Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and I actually have linked the how to share benchmarking data with Building Performance Colorado document here, which again, if you can't access these slides immediately, you can find on the knowledge base or on the CEO website, or by requesting help through the Help Center by just submitting a ticket there. So hopefully it's pretty straightforward for most people to set up their accounts. Additionally, building owners are also required to pay an annual $100 fee per covered building. And this can be paid by credit card or electronic check only during the reporting season. So it has to be paid during reporting season, March 1st through June 1st on an annual basis. And this year we've actually integrated the payment portal directly into the Beam system. So when you go onto Beam, which if you're unaware, is the building owner database and the state's database that we use to track and manage all the different information and fee payments. Now that it's integrated into the system, I know there were lots of problems with the payment portal in previous years, but have not heard too many reports now that we have it getting set up of people having issues using the payment portal. So hopefully that's been fully rectified. And if you ever do have any issues with the payment portal, please submit a ticket right away, and we'll be sure to help you however we can there. Some other things to note for benchmarking is one option building owners do have is to request a time extension if you need additional time to submit your benchmarking information and you're just not going to have time to get it by June 1st. If you can show and provide documentation that the building owner has made a good faith effort to comply and get their information, but because of the failure or refusal of a utility or a utility customer to provide the necessary information or permission needed to accurately update your Energy Star Portfolio Manager account, you can request a time extension if you think that you will be able to get it just at a slightly delayed time frame. Time extensions must be submitted by May 15th of the reporting season, and we're allowed to grant up to 2 additional weeks to get the information over and comply. You can also request an annual waiver from having to report your benchmarking, which is discussed on the next slide, please. So waivers for Building Performance Colorado. A waiver in this case is a 1-year reprieve from having to comply with the benchmarking requirements. And that's if you meet some of the, at least one of the qualifying criteria at right, which includes buildings that were unoccupied for at least 30 consecutive days in the previous year. There was a demolition permit issued for the entire building. The building has met one or more of the conditions for financial hardship, which are all spelled out in great detail in the technical guidance as well as Regulation 28. The covered building does not meet a qualifying utilities aggregation threshold, or one or more of the utility data customers refuse to provide the owner with data, or the covered building has 4 or more utility customers and the owner is unable to get the aggregated data. So again, you can request a time extension if you think you'll be able to get that information, but you just need some additional time to pull it all together. But if you're making a good faith effort to get this information from the utility, or if you're a building owner with a number of different tenants in the building and you're just finding it difficult to get the fully aggregated data that you need to provide accurate and updated reports, you can request a waiver and if you show proper documentation, CEO can consider that and allow for a 1-year reprieve from having to submit benchmarking information. Waiver requests may be submitted once the start of the program or the reporting season opens on March 1st through the 1st of May of a given reporting season. And one important thing to note is even if you're approved for an annual waiver, you are still required to pay the annual fee to be fully in compliance for that year. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about the actual building performance standards and the related requirements for this program, which will start to come into effect relatively soon. Next slide, please. So there are 2 or really 4 main compliance pathways for the building performance standards element of this program. One of the pathways, the main overarching pathways, is the energy efficiency pathway, which uses energy use intensity as the compliance metric, or the greenhouse gas reduction pathway, which uses greenhouse gas intensity and greenhouse gas emissions as the efficiency metric. And energy use intensity, if you're not sure what that means or how that's calculated, it's a pretty simple calculation. It's just the building's total energy use measured typically in kBTUs over the total gross floor area of the building is how we calculate the energy use intensity. And for the purposes of this program, we use weather normalized site energy use intensity. So the targets that you'll be given will take weather normalization into account and look at the emissions or the energy use intensity at the site of the building, not to be confused with source emissions or source EUI, which incorporates and takes into account, the total emissions or energy use from wherever the energy is being produced. We're just looking at the weather normalized site EUI or greenhouse gas intensity, as the case may be. Next slide, please. And within those 2 main pathways, the energy efficiency pathway and the GHGI pathway, there are 2 sub pathways for each building, or for each pathway. In each, you can get, like I mentioned, a weather normalized site EUI property type target based on the property type that you've been assigned in Portfolio Manager based on the unique characteristics and business activities at your building. This is the case for both the property type target for energy efficiency and greenhouse gas intensity. And within each of those pathways, you could also select what we're calling the standard percent reduction pathway, which is the same for both energy efficiency and the greenhouse gas intensity reductions. And this requires in 2026 through 2029, during those years, you need to meet a 13% reduction of either your EUI or your GHGI from your 2021 baseline, and then from 2030 through 2050, a 29% reduction is required to be achieved. Building owners have the ability to select whatever pathway makes the most sense for them. And even after you've selected a pathway initially, you'll have the ability to change your pathway, and we'll get more into the process to do that a little bit later. And the question, reporting year, data year, these are all based on the calendar years. So the targets are all calendar year targets. Next slide, please. So we get a lot of questions about renewable energy requirements, what the requirements are. And yeah, Jason, just to answer your question really quick, as I mentioned off the top, the website, those targets that you've listed there, 7% by 2026 and 20% in 2030, those are the entire sector-wide targets that are required to be met. The requirements for individual buildings are different than those overall sector-wide targets. So yeah, for renewable energy by the way the rulemaking has been written, renewable energy can only be used by building owners when you're selecting one of the GHGI reduction pathways, whether it's the property type target or the standard percent reduction target pathway. And building owners, if there's renewable energy credits or RECs that are associated with the renewable energy that's being used for a building, the RECs are required to be owned by the building owner or retired on their behalf in order to be compliant, in order to use renewable energy to meet the requirements and become in compliance for this program. And this includes REC ownership for contracts for on-site renewable production, off-site renewable production, power purchase agreements or PPAs, community solar garden subscriptions, and really any other sort of renewable energy source that you can think of. The idea behind this is to incentivize building owners to do, focus on energy efficiency before using renewable energy, and really get everyone to make their buildings as energy efficient as possible before implementing renewable energy. There is some guidance that we're planning on putting together for this in order for people to determine, if they've completed all cost-effective energy efficiency measures and a number of other things. I'll talk about that a little later, but you can expect that guidance to be coming your way pretty soon. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the largest questions that we get, or most frequent questions, I should say, that we get for this program, or how can I adjust my target if I don't think I'll be able to meet my target or do anything else, or if there's some other reason that we need to look at adjusting the target. So there are three main right now target adjustment procedures that we're going to have open pretty soon. And these are, based on the unique property and use types, as well as circumstances that may have prohibited upgrades, such as delayed delivery of equipment. So these three main buckets for which people can request target adjustments are as follows. So the individualized target process. This is a process for building for a smaller subset of buildings to get individualized targets because they don't neatly fit into any of the property type targets assigned by portfolio manager, or have multiple property types, not one of which is the dominant site. So for individualized targets, buildings that meet the MAI, again, manufacturing, agricultural, or industrial definition, but don't have one of their property use, the MAI use types, exceed 50% of the building's gross floor area, that would make them a non-covered building. They're allowed to request an individualized target, as well as facilities that do cannabis or marijuana cultivation, indoor facilities, data centers, and other buildings without defined building types. So it's a fairly limited subset of buildings, but these are buildings that really don't fit neatly into one bucket or another and need to get an individualized target. A note on mixed use buildings for purposes of individualized targets. Yes, Jamie, I will speak to the target adjustments for data centers in a minute. So mixed use buildings for the purposes of the Building Performance Colorado program are defined as buildings with multiple property use types where not one use type exceeds 50% of the building's gross floor area. So even buildings with multiple property types, they might not all meet that mixed use criteria, but can request other adjustments, which I'll speak to in a little bit. But if you do meet that criteria for a mixed use building, you can submit for an individualized target. A note on data centers, whole building data centers have their own individualized process as well. That's even different from the individualized target process. So buildings that are whole building data centers are allowed to request a PUE or power use effectiveness target. There's a specific pathway and form for that, which is now available and open on the website. If you're a data center building owner and you want to request a PUE, what you can do is go on to the Beam database. There's a specific form for you to fill out that demonstrates what you need to provide to get this PUE. It's mostly just an ASHRAE level 2 or equivalent audit showing how the building is performing now, as well as the opportunities to reduce energy usage in the future, as well as the total energy consumption for the building and the building's specific IT energy consumption. By providing that, we'll be able to assign you a PUE, or again, power usage effectiveness target. And again, that's just for whole building data centers, not for buildings that have a smaller data center, Class B data center or smaller as part of it. If you're in that situation where you have a data center, but it's not as part of your building, but it's not the full building, we can talk about some of the other adjustments that you might be able to take advantage of for there. Sorry, can you hear me? I think I just lost my connection briefly. All sorts of internet issues today. I'm sorry.
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. Not a great day for all these technical difficulties, but that's just how it goes, I guess. Okay, yeah, thanks. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Yeah, going back to standardized target adjustments, and yes, I'll speak through some of the details and the process in a minute after I go through the different sorts of adjustments. So the standardized target adjustment is available for buildings that have opted into one of the property type target pathways and are not using the standard percent reduction pathway. Any building of any type that is using one of the property type target pathways can request the standardized target adjustment. And this will not be as individualized a process as the individualized target process, as you might imagine from the names, but it will give CEO and our partners a chance to review all the different criteria or all the information you provided and provide a target, an adjusted target that's more realistic and more reflective of your building's actual energy use and the unique characteristics of the building. There's also the timeline adjustment procedure, and this is available for any building owner of any type, regardless of pathway. And this is where you don't necessarily want to change the target that you've been assigned, but you would like to change the timeline on which you have to meet the target. And this is, a more simple, less intensive process and pathway. It doesn't allow for this process to have your target adjusted, but let's say you think you'll be able to meet the 2030 target, but for XYZ reason, you're not going to be able to be fully in compliance until 2031. You can submit all the information related to that, and we will be able to review that. And if we agree with your rationale and think it's a reasonable request, we'll adjust the timeline and note that in our system. So even if 2031 rolls around and you haven't met the criteria yet, you won't be overly penalized. So just a few quick notes on the timeline for these different things. We're planning on rolling out the individualized target adjustment process in May of 2025. So next month we'll have that fully ready, and that we're expecting to have the standardized target adjustment and timeline adjustment forms, procedures, processes, pathways, all set up shortly after this reporting season ends in June 2025. So still a couple things and review processes on our end that we need to figure out for this, but these will be available very soon to everyone, and we expect to get a bunch of requests in. We'll do our best to work through them as quickly as possible. So a couple questions in the chat, which I'll address now because they are related to this whole system, or this whole processes rather. One of the questions is an example of a reason to request a standardized target adjustment. Yes, these are listed in the rulemaking as well as the technical guidance, but it's very clear that it says these are criteria that are included but not limited to. So there's not a specific reason that you have or criteria you have to meet to request a standard target adjustment besides selecting a property type target pathway. But some reasons that we've identified that people might need to request a standard target adjustment are for, buildings with inherent unique characteristics of the physical building that make the weather normalized site EUI target unachievable or cost prohibitive. If the building's property type has changed due to a renovation or some other aspect, if you're experiencing a financial hardship, and that's something that we can consider, though that's usually more for the timeline adjustment, but we can certainly consider that as well. And then to the question about parking available as a target adjustment, yes, if there is parking area energy use that you weren't able to exclude from the benchmarking, you can request that as an adjustment as well. And so there's a bunch of different reasons you could request a standard target adjustment, but it's basically if, any reason that the target that you've been assigned isn't necessarily reflective of the realities of your building, or if you don't think that you're going to be able to achieve it for some other reason, those are all reasons that you can request a target adjustment. Or for example, if you're unable to, well, actually that's for the individualized target. So I'll go back to that because there was a question about, can you explain the process for getting an individualized target approved? And yes, we're creating the form for that process, which will have all the information required on there for who's eligible and the sort of information that you have to provide. The exact information that is required depends on the reason that you're eligible for the individualized target. For example, if you, one of the reasons that I didn't mention before is if you're a building with EV or electric vehicle charging stations and you're not able to submeter that out, you just have to submit documentation of the EV charging stations and their related energy use, which is a pretty simple adjustment. For example, if you're a mixed use building, you have to provide the percentage of the gross floor area used for each property type within the building, as well as some other energy use, so we can assign a more appropriate target based on the unique characteristics of your building. So the exact information you need to provide will be slightly different based on the reason that you're eligible for the individualized target process. And like I said, that'll all be spelled out on the form when we have it ready. And if there's any questions about that when the process opens up in about a month, you'll always have the help desk available to request assistance and guidance if you're unsure. Yeah, and so a quick note on the timing for all three of these adjustment processes. Like I said, we're making them available in the next little bit, in the next couple weeks, months. For the 2026 targets, these are all required to be submitted by December 31st, 2025. And for 2030 targets, they're required to be submitted by December 31st, 2029. So obviously not a whole ton of time to request adjustments for the 2026 targets, but clearly significantly more time to request adjustments for 2030. And I have some updates related to that I'll speak to at the very end of this presentation. Sorry, I realize I'm a bit behind, so I'm going to try to speed through the next little bits of it. Vincent, just to answer your question about ASHRAE audits, yes, an ASHRAE audit is a requirement to request a standardized target adjustment or a timeline adjustment. Next slide, please. So just a quick look at some of the deadlines related to benchmarking, which I mentioned previously. Right now, everything's expected, the reporting season is always expected to open on March 1st and close on June 1st of a given year. Mentions by the end of December of this year is the deadline to request target adjustments for the 2026 targets. And then by January 31st, 2027 is the deadline to request your compliance pathway to be adjusted for 2026. And I'll speak to that a little bit more. Stacy, it's by the end of December, so December 31st, 2025. Next slide, please. And so as I've referenced a couple times, we've developed a technical guidance document to help building owners and industry professionals understand the requirements. It covers everything that I've discussed today in greater detail and is basically just a plainer language version of everything that's spelled out in the very legal language heavy document that is Regulation 28, which again is the rulemaking that established most of these procedures and requirements. So along with the technical guidance, which is, I think, a good resource, here are some anticipated updated guidance and forms that I've referenced a couple different times. So we updated the non-covered building and annual waiver and time extension request forms to be updated. We did that already last month. We also fully redesigned the Beam knowledge base last month. So I think it's a lot more user-friendly now and easier to find the information that you need. We also fully established the PUE process for data centers, so that's available on the website now. As I mentioned a little bit easier, the guidance for renewable energy cost effectiveness and eligibility, that'll be released this month. Hopefully we're working on that right now. Also hoping to provide some updated guidance on how to report at the campus level due to a lot of questions around that. So we're finalizing some of our choices around that and how that should work. So we're going to have that available to everyone, hopefully this month as well. As mentioned, next month, we're going to roll out the individualized compliant target request process. The following month, we're going to have the timeline and target adjustment request forms and the pathway adjustment form. That's something that we'll be putting together soon as well. And we're also going to fully update the technical guidance this year once / if the proposed legislation is signed into law. And I see a couple different questions about that, so that's a perfect segue into the next slide. So as people have probably heard, or even if you haven't, there are some proposed legislative updates being considered right now by the state legislature to modify certain aspects of the Building Performance Colorado program. Please note, and I'll say this a couple times, all of these changes and everything else is still being considered. Nothing is yet final. Not sure exactly where the final changes will end up if the bill is passed at all. It's all still in flux. Amendments are being proposed and introduced and adopted, and there's still negotiations ongoing with a number of stakeholders. But I did want to make people aware of this since if it does pass, there's a lot of differences that'll change, and I think all very positive changes for the program that'll make everything work a little bit easier. So these are certainly not all of the changes that are being considered, but I wanted to call out some of the most major changes here for your knowledge. So I think the biggest one is probably making the 2026 targets a goal rather than a firm target, which will give building owners additional time to come into compliance and meet their 2030 targets. Again, have to stress this is not yet final and approved and passed by the legislature and signed into law by the governor. But this is something that we've heard from obviously tons of building owners that said they didn't have enough time to meet the 2026 targets, and there's more target adjustments that need to happen before people can be expected to be held to their 2026 targets, which CEO and myself personally totally agree with. So really hoping this change is adopted. I think it'll make everything a lot easier for everyone while also keeping the 2030 targets exactly where they are. So we are still on track to meet our long-term environmental and decarbonization goals. One of the other proposed changes is allowing building owners to use 2019 as their baseline year instead of 2021. Obviously, in 2021, everyone was still very much in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and building occupancy rates were totally in flux, and a lot of buildings had energy use in 2021 that was not necessarily reflective of their actual energy use when the building is operating as with full occupancy or closer to full occupancy and as designed. So that's another one of the proposed changes that makes a lot of sense. Tyler and Stacy, to your specific questions, hopefully that answers that. Yes, one of the other things that's being proposed is deemed compliance for buildings subject to local building performance standard programs. I think the most notable one that's out there right now is the City and County of Denver's Energized Denver program, which is the City and County of Denver's BPS program. What we would like to do is allow for deemed compliance. So if this passes, CEO will have the ability to fully evaluate the building performance standards programs in other local jurisdictions. And if we think that they are at least as stringent, if not more stringent than the state's program, building owners can just comply with their local BPS program and provide some, documentation or verification to the state showing that they're fully in compliance with that program. And then instead of having to comply with both programs, which are very similar but have slightly different, slight differences, that'll make it a lot easier, hopefully, for people to meet their targets and stay on track for compliance, but also reduce some of the administrative burdens. And another thing that we're excited about is this will establish a new enterprise fund to provide additional funding and technical assistance to building owners and help fund things like building energy audits, ASHRAE level 2 audits for people, and some other things. And the exact specifics of that are still under discussion. But I wanted to call out some of the most pressing changes or largest changes, I guess, that are being proposed. Again, just to be fully clear, these are not yet finalized, and some of this may happen, all of it may happen, none of it may happen. It's really up to the legislators and the governor at this point, if and when it's passed by the state legislature, of course. As mentioned, this is certainly not all of the changes that are being proposed, but these are the largest ones. And I can take some questions on that, though, of course, nothing is final till it's final. Next slide, please. Jamie, do I have an idea of when this will finalize? Hopefully soon. I'm not totally sure, to be honest. I'm not the expert on the legislative process. We have a whole team on our end that's doing that. Even if it passes soon, none of these changes will impact the reporting season for this year. So right now, it's business as usual. Everything I laid out in the beginning of the presentation still holds true for now. And then if this is passed, the changes will definitely be reflected in the 2026 reporting season next year, assuming this does eventually pass in more or less the way that it's being proposed as current. And I wanted to finish this off just by talking about some supportive programs and resources that building owners can take advantage of to come into compliance of this and save some money while doing so. Next slide, please. So this is certainly not the most full comprehensive list, but these are some really good starting places that I would suggest. Your local utility likely has a lot of rebates available for you. I haven't listed them all here because a couple different utilities in the state, all with varying levels of rebates and different eligibility criteria and all that. But those are always a good place to look for. There is the CPACE program, which is the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing Program, which is one of the programs that the Colorado Energy Office provides. This is a really great program which allows financing for eligible energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy program improvements for buildings, aimed specifically at commercial buildings as well as nonprofit organizations, multifamily units, and others. The financing is repaid through a voluntary special assessment on the owner's property tax bill, and definitely would look at the website there for more information and reach out to some of my colleagues here at the Colorado Energy Office who are listed there, Eric Cowan and Michael Turner, who both do a great job administering that program. There's also the Colorado Clean Energy Fund Loan Program, which is not a CEO project, but it's a commercial. It's a group that makes commercial loans available to borrowers in the affordable housing, industrial, agricultural, municipal, and nonprofit sectors to help bridge the gap between what building owners are able to achieve on their own, and what's needed to meet compliance. And it's some very low interest loans that people might be interested in. And the Colorado Energy Office also has energy performance contracting available for public buildings, which allows for significant energy efficiency and renewable energy upgrades to be made using the savings of the future savings of these energy efficient measures being installed to pay for the upfront cost of the program. So I would definitely check out the Colorado Energy Office website for more details on each of these programs and several other programs that might be more useful for your specific building sector. But I think these are all good places to start looking. I think that's the last slide, Sophie, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. Next slide after this one, please. So I just want to say thanks everyone for sitting through this presentation. Sorry it took a little bit longer than I expected to go through everything, but we can open it up to some questions and answers now. And just you see here listed is Ben Goldstein. That's me with my email address. Just realized my job title has since been updated since I put this presentation together initially. So I have a different title now, but that's still me. And then the director of building carbonization, my direct supervisor is Delynn Southern, who many of you may know. She's been with the Colorado Energy Office for a while now, and she also does a really great job. And you can reach out to us with questions, comments, concerns. If you have questions about how to, do something for a specific building, would definitely encourage you to go through the Beam Help Center, because our great team over there will likely be able to give you quicker and easier responses and guidance and assistance with more building specific concerns. But you're welcome to reach out to myself as well.